The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, veteran progressive pollster Vic Fingerhut says if there's one thing to take away from this election, it's that Democrats have to change course and take a stronger stand for the working class. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Vic Fingerhut is a pioneer among Democratic polling and media consultants who has consistently argued for a progressive populist message. He says that if Democrats want to move past its narrow victories in 2020, they have to reestablish themselves as the party for working class Americans. And we say hello to Vic Fingerhut, veteran polling and media advisor who's been a consultant to over 7 Democratic presidential campaigns, stretching back to Hubert Humphrey and Jimmy Carter. He was one of the few pollsters, in fact, who throughout 2016 saw the serious political danger to the Democrats of a populist like Trump, who had appealed to traditional Democratic working-class voters. And a longtime faculty member, Vic is Associate Professor Emeritus of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Mary Washington. Vic Fingerhut, as always, great to have you with us. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Well, it's always a pleasure to discuss things with you, Jim, and I'm glad to hear things are going okay with you. That's great.
Yeah, and I guess we're on the third or fourth Tuesday of this week now. At least that's what it feels like. This thing has been drawn out, this election of ours. You know, Vic, a lot of folks, myself included, we expected a crushing defeat of the president. We expected a blue wave in the Senate and a continued blue wave in the House. We haven't seen any of that. What does this election tell us about the distribution of party loyalties and left-right strength in America?
Well, that's a great question, Jim. I mean, let's start off by saying, everyone was the media coverage, the pollsters, everything had already determined it was going to be a landslide for our side. Well, there are a couple things about this. First of all, the election really is, as crazy as it sounds, is a confirmation of the status quo. Basically the same lineup of forces that were in 2016 lined up in 2020. Now, in 5 or 6 different states, 10 or 15,000 votes determined the winner. And then in 2016, all those close ones went to Trump. It appears, as of today, that this time the close ones are going to go to Biden. But, you switch 100,000 votes around in the country now. In Pennsylvania, in, fewer than a couple thousand in Georgia, a couple thousand in Nevada, and we would be having a much different conversation. Just in terms of 2016, if you flipped 100,000 votes around in Wisconsin and Michigan and some other places, it would have been a different conversation.
Yeah.
So the amazing thing is that the fact that you have a very similar situation. I think one of the differences in terms of the distribution of the vote, I don't want to get into that because you're going to be hearing so much about that in the next couple of weeks, is that the country is becoming a little flatter. In other words, the closeness is not just 3 states now, it's 6 or 7 states between Democrat and Republican, or Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, whoever thought that one up. So the country gradually, I mean, they're still in the heartlands of the Democrats on the coasts. And, within each state, you have the urban and, college community, blah, 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 which are pro-Democrat. And you have the rural, the countryside, which is much more pro-Republican at this point, which is remarkable. All these things are remarkable reversals of history. But it indicates really that most of the trends of 2016, and I might say the 2014 as well, the Democrats doing better among college-educated people, among people with graduate degrees, becoming the party of the middle and upper middle classes. The Democrats and the Republicans moving into traditional Democratic turf, doing well with non-degreed working people, winning blue-collar areas in many places overwhelmingly. It varied a little bit from place to place, but they beat the Democrats, it appears from the numbers that have come in already, among non-degreed working people. I mean, can you imagine FDR waking up this morning and saying, "Where's my coalition?"
Yeah, right.
I mean, these are the people who were the backbone of the New Deal, not just in the 1930s and 40s when FDR was alive. These people voted Democratic for 50 or 60 years. The Republicans only won the House twice between 1930 and 1994. 64 years, we controlled the House, 60 out of 64 years. We had the support of regular workers and working class Americans. I think the lesson for this for the Democrats is they better get back. If they could still, win these tight ones with the Republicans without the support of the working class. I don't think that's much of a future for the Democratic Party, frankly.
You mentioned Michigan and Wisconsin, and I found this somewhat interesting of a twist. Biden wins Michigan and Wisconsin, not by a whole lot, but Ohio. Now, granted, Ohio, since 2000, Ohio has certainly trended more to the right. Okay, we know that. But what I found interesting is that he flips Michigan and Wisconsin back to blue. But in Ohio, from a percentage standpoint, it's the exact same race as it was 4 years ago. Is that a failure of the Democrats' messaging to get through to the working Americans in Ohio, or is this one of these shifts that you just mentioned, where just the state's just moving to the right?
Well, I think it's maybe a little bit of both, but I think primarily it's a trend that's broader. Even though you can say, if you look at Wisconsin and Michigan, they both turned out to be very close states. I mean, Ohio has always been somewhat more Republican than Wisconsin and Ohio, than Wisconsin and Michigan. I mean, Michigan became in the 1930s a Democratic state because of the auto workers and because of the industrialization. Wisconsin was always kind of a little behind them. And then Ohio, which was the heartland of Republicanism. This was where Taft was from. I don't go into the history, but Ohio has always been very Republican. They've had Democratic senators. They had, I don't go into the Frank Lauschie and folks beyond that, but I wouldn't, you're looking at a difference of 6 or 8% or 5 or 6% in Ohio versus 1% in Wisconsin. I don't think that, and even in Ohio, Sherrod Brown won 2 years ago.
Right.
A very liberal Democrat. My feeling is that this is a broader national thing. That the Democrats, as a country, looking over the whole country, even in states they won or lost, that they've lost the strong support of regular working class Americans, and they've made up for it in some places by the African American vote, although that is, limited. I mean, they're kind of pushing the limits of that right now. African Americans represent 13-14% of the electorate. They deliver 90% for the Democrats, and the Democrats can be very thankful for that. But there are limits to that. On the other hand, they have endured kind of a secular growth among college degreed young people. And so they're becoming the party of the middle and upper middle classes, a higher class average and a higher education average than the Democrats, which is a reversal of everything since the New Deal. And my own view is, and they're different as well, you don't need working class people. We can win with a new coalition of college degrees. And the Democrats got hammered among people with advanced degrees. And young people, and and then people with various other issues that are either gender related or ethnically related. The Democrats could build a coalition, a winning coalition around those polls, which they did, which apparently they may have done this past week. But it's a close one. And there is a question of whether a progressive party, can continue to have the same character that it's always had, cut off from its working class base. Not that the working class should be the exclusive voters. It never was. I mean, the working class, the white working class, or the non, always was supported by African Americans, was supported by new immigrants. They're obviously a mixture of folks. You can't win America with one group. The country's too big.
Sure.
You better have a lot of support in a lot of different places. But I mean, there is a question, and I know it's a question that's a great concern to the labor movement, of having a Democratic Party which seems to be increasingly unappealing to working Americans. You can go back over the last decade or 15 years and say, there are reasons for that. NAFTA, trade policy that devastated the states we just talked about. Michigan was devastated, Ohio, upstate New York. I mean, the old industrial world, that used to be solid Democrat. People were sitting around without any jobs for a couple of years.
Right.
And people say, well, I've always voted Democratic. And then this guy, Trump, shows up, and he's not a traditional George Romney upper class Republican business guy who's spent his whole life trying to screw people. He's a guy shows up who starts talking about being tough on trade, about being pushed around by the Chinese, about other countries not paying their fair share. And all of a sudden you have a different kind of Republican. You got a populist. And in many respects, he tremendously out-populist Hillary. Now, that wasn't a great job. I don't think that was a major challenge. But the reality is that even with Biden, who was a good working, traditional Democrat, Democratic guy from working class backgrounds, always been on the side of labor and working people. I mean, Biden, was probably about the best we could offer up this year.
I agree with that.
He barely beats, and even he barely, if in fact everything holds up, this could change tomorrow. But even he just barely is able to beat Trump, who ran into a pandemic that he apparently, that killed him. I mean, there's no question that if the election had been held minus the pandemic, we would be looking at the second Trump administration.
Absolutely.
All the voting data shows that. All the voting data shows that.
I don't think you'd find anybody that would. I don't think you'd find anybody that would argue that. I mean,
now they won't. Yeah. Yeah. At the time, and the Democrats actually. I'll be perfect. In fact, 21st century Democrats played a major role through Jim Rosapep. We did some polling, blah, 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 that got the Democrats onto this health care issue. Because, in fact, the health care issue is one of the few things that people still believe it had more faith in the Democrats than, and this is amazing, than the jobs issue. In other words, the party of that fought the Great Depression was no longer seen as the party of jobs. It was the other party. It was the party of Herbert Hoover. Everybody was, they're better on jobs. And you can imagine what FDR would have thought of that, maybe. But so you have that, and then you have, which they use in 2018 to cause a tremendous democratic movement in 2018 by emphasizing the healthcare issue. And then, sadly and tragically, but politically helpfully, hate to say it, COVID hit. And in short, it drove the one issue that the Democrats still had strength on front and center. Mm-hmm. And even then, they barely, if everything holds up, they still barely won. And that should be a warning. So while everyone's doing high fives today, if it holds up, the Democrats should understand that in a real sense, without COVID, they probably would have lost. And even if they won, the loss of working class votes now in really 3 of the last 4 elections, 2014, 2016, 2018, it was mixed, but we still lost working class votes in 2018. One can make a case, the last 4 elections, the party of FDR and JFK has lost the working class vote in the United States. And that better be a wake-up call for the Democrats.
Yeah.
That means being much more sensitive to not only economic positions, and I hope this isn't too discouraging, Jim, because I know you're a good, strong believer.
I'm getting ready to cry.
No. Well, it's better to recognize it and deal with it than ignore it.
No, absolutely.
Because in fact, there were things that polling that we did, so that even though people thought that Trump was better on jobs and the economy and leading the recovery, that we asked, well, who's going to be on your side in a labor management dispute? People said, Biden, because he's Democrat. So we still have strengths that we can use if we use them. And this is not a done deal.
Right.
And so it's what we do, what matters. I mean, it's like the Republicans. They were getting, they got hammered for 60 years. And Gingrich came along, or Reagan came along, and they started changing their message. And they regained the votes of people who had abandoned them for 6 decades. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason we can't turn the wheel back again the other way, but we got to do it. It's not going to happen automatically. Every time a voter, in this case, looking at working people, every time a voter casts a Republican ballot, for some people it's the first time, 2016, sometimes it was the second time or the third time. But by the time you do it 3, 4, 5 times, you've probably changed the basic orientation of that voter. So if the Democrats want to turn this whole thing around, they got to do it fairly quickly. It's not, even if we'll see what Biden does. Can he help? You have the White House, you can draw the issues. Even if you don't have the Senate, they may have the Senate. You can start drawing the issues that push people back onto our side. But again, it's not going to be easy because a lot of traditional Democrats have now voted Republican 3 or 4 times in a row. And that's pretty darn scary. It's not going to be easy bringing them all back across our side of the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's doable. Yeah, and it's our task. I mean, if we don't do it, we have no one to blame but ourselves. We can't blame the stars or the heavens or whatever. The old Shakespearean thing. It's not up there. It's in ourselves that the difference lies.
Right. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure.
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We're talking with progressive pollster Vic Fingerhut. Coming up next, we continue with a look ahead to 2022 and beyond, and what Democrats have to do to prove they're on the side of working people. But first, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
A jittery week at the polls, huh? One measure of our political anxiety is that liquor sales spiked election week. Also, it's probably not a coincidence that a new breakthrough in drug legalization was made on Election Day when 56% of Oregon voters said yes to sanctioning the use of magic mushrooms, which are said to relieve anxiety and depression. Political pundits have rushed out to say, even to gloat, that Tuesday was a debacle for Democrats, especially for the progressive movement, and we certainly did not match our extraordinarily high expectations. But hold the mushrooms. Despite a queasy roller coaster ride in the Dump Trump race and disappointing shortfalls in some other contests, 2020 is hardly a debacle. Take heart from the phenomenal victories scored this year by our grassroots progressive movement, from picking up a dozen congressional seats to winning hundreds of local offices. This is movement building at its best and purest. Not only are we electing a broad and expanding network of officials, but also these runs increase the number, skills, and collective experience of our grassroots volunteers. They spread and refine our progressive populist message, and they teach us how to run better next time, if we're willing to learn. My message is an old and proven one. Persevere, keep pushing, build on what you learn, reach out. A movement is not a weekend project. Ask those who launched the women's suffrage movement, none of whom lived to vote, but they kept advancing. Or ask any of the various communities of outsiders who fought and are still fighting for civil rights and human dignity. These are the fights worth being part of. Winning doesn't come on one election day, but over a lifetime of participation. This is Jim Hightower saying, remember this bit of wisdom imparted to me years ago by a West Texas farmer. Battling the bastards is about as much fun as you can have with your clothes on.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We continue now with our conversation with Vic Fingerhut, one of the most respected voices on Democratic polling. Vic, of course, it's nothing less than fantastic news that Joe Biden is now our president-elect, but we have to admit, voting fell far short of the blue wave we were hoping to see in the House and Senate. What is the most central task moving forward into 2022?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. things are complex. We'll see what happens with COVID. But I think basically they have to be aggressive, I think, in terms of, and even, it's not going to be an easy act to follow because to some degree Trump has been pretty aggressive in trying to get people back to work and stuff like that. But I think they have to be more aggressive in terms of worker rights, in terms of pensions, in terms of health care, in terms of the things that people want, even beyond just they want the job. If you don't give them a job, forget that. If you throw people out of work, they're going to vote for you. So they have to prove that they have to reprove. I mean, the party of FDR has to reprove that they're good for jobs. And at the end of the election this time, Trump did not have a gigantic advantage on that issue. He had some, and of course, we had a real good advantage on health care. So it didn't make much sense to engage Trump on his turf, and the Democrats were pretty good about that. But now, once back in office, they have to reestablish that they're the party on the side of working people. They're going to defend the pensions. They're going to defend their health care. They're going to make sure the members of their family don't get pushed around at the workplace. Those are the kind of issues that the Republicans are vulnerable about. Those are the kind of issues that when you stick it to them, even at the state legislative level, Republicans start behaving like Republicans again, oriented towards the businesses, the corporations, and that's fine. It's America. There have to be people who represent them, and their positions are not necessarily evil. They're just different. Biden has to listen to these Democratic constituents. One of the, when Obama took office, unlike Trump, Obama had 75% positive ratings. He listened more to the concerns about, for several months, while people were losing their health care, their jobs, not everybody, but while that was happening, on the evening news, they were showing pictures of Wall Street guys getting bonuses. And I remember that period clearly, and I say, holy shit, this is the party of Roosevelt, and every night on the television they show, guys on Wall Street getting big bonuses and having parties. And then they cut to Ohio, or they cut to Michigan, and they show people who've lost not only their jobs, they lost their house, they lost their home.
Right.
And I don't know if you remember that period.
All too well.
It was a terrible period, and I think part of that was reflected in the vote yesterday. It wasn't all that. I think Biden ran a pretty good campaign. But he inherited some stuff, and he inherited some bad feeling on certain issues, on trade and so on and so forth. But so obviously the Democrats have to correct this. They have to be seen again as the party that will stand up for ordinary working people, and the Democrats are the go-to party for that. At this moment in time, they are not. And they better change that before 2024. And hopefully they can start making inroads on that before 2022. And it's not a problem for them because they believe in these things. So there's no reason for them to be tepid or go halfway. And I think it's true with Obama. I think Obama was a good guy. His heart was in the right place. But his advisors said, well, we can't be too much. We can't unbalance the budget too much. And so we can't do too much counter-cyclical stuff. And I think Obama's advisors pushed him to a more centrist position. And I think the Democrats, not because Obama didn't care about ordinary people, he certainly did. And over time, he demonstrated that. But unfortunately, at the beginning of his administration, he was perceived in these particular parts of the country. Hey, I just lost my job. I just lost my house. What are the Democrats doing helping the guys on Wall Street? And there's been a memory of that. That is a problem for us in these states. So we'll see. I mean, do I hope that's not too negative or discouraging, But the Democrats do represent. If you look at the votes every day in Congress, if you look at the votes every day in state legislatures, the Democrats are the ones protecting pensions or protecting treatment of people at the workplace, about raising wage rates. So we're on the right side of the issues. We just have to make it clear to the voters that that's where we are and what the Republicans stand for. And unfortunately, Trump gave a projection of the Republicans being more for ordinary people than actually is true for the Republican Party as a whole. And we have to deal with that, and I think do a much better job of our messaging. It sounds like a PR Madison Avenue thing, but that's not the point. The point is that in place after place, legislature after legislature, the Democrats are pushing for things that help working people. The Republicans are pushing for things that help the rich and the corporations. Again, there's nothing evil in that. You can represent whoever you want to represent in America. But that's the reality, and we have to make sure that people understand that.
And Vic, I have been screaming for years about how bad the messaging is for the Democrats. They have an opportunity. Look, they don't talk about how the fact that economies do much better under Democratic leadership than they do under Republicans historically. They don't talk about that kind of thing, and that's just one of the many things where they should be going. So now, let's look even further ahead, 2024 and beyond. What do you see as the best strategies for both parties in these next coming years?
Well, the Republicans have gone pretty far on offering folks pretty, I'm always amazed. The Republicans, there's a certain consistency in their positions, which I think they realize are not particularly popular. But their consistency is, balance the budget, cut taxes, don't raise taxes. And now they've been buttressed by the social issues, which they've always had an edge on. I mean, back 40 years ago in Pennsylvania, they knocked off a very popular U.S. Senator, Joe Clark, on the gun issue. So they've had their extra issues too, besides that they've been able to use guns, and the whole question of abortion and choice has pushed certain people, and so the combination of their cultural issues. Issues relating to religion and values has brought in one of the key distinctions in terms of Democrat-Republican vote is the Democrats do very good with people who are secular. The Republicans do remarkably well with fundamental voters. Fundamental Christians voted overwhelmingly for Trump. Now, people say, well, how can he do that? We know all about what he does personally. Well, the fact that he's able to overcome that and still get 70-80% of the votes of fundamental Christians in the United States is pretty remarkable.
Mind-boggling,
so there are values questions. Yeah, there are values questions. And there's also, and I think the Democrats have to address this. And part of this is something they can't control, which is the media making fun of Trump voters. I mean, it's one thing to make fun of Trump, but this notion that the Trump voter is some stupid bigot, dumb, Yahoo. Yeah, well, that may sell pretty good in New York and L.A. But the best thing we had going for ourselves is that most of the swing voters don't watch, the late nights. Most of the voters no longer don't watch mainstream TV, because if they did, we would have lost this election.
Right.
Because there was tremendous elitist, insulting motif, not only among the media people, but often the Democratic spokesman. And treated the Trump voter as a bigoted Yahoo. That's not how you win voters back. I mean, you don't have to be a PhD to know that's not a great strategy.
Just ask Hillary about the one statement about deplorables. I mean, that was one of the first of many nails in the coffin for her.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I mean, as I said, part of it was also driven by the media. I mean, in 2016, I remember they'd go out on the streets, the commentators from New York, they'd find some guy who could barely speak English and say, he guy's out for Trump. And they put the mic up to him and say, why? And he didn't say anything. Some guy who could barely speak, obviously that's an extreme example. But basically, there was this kind of elitist view. And to some degree, I'll give you one example, and I don't want to push this too far, but I was doing a focus group for a union. And these guys had been historically Democratic, because I worked with this union over the years. And it was prior to COVID. It was in 2019. Had about 30 people there. Most of them had been historic Democrats. Last in 2016, they had held loyal, and they had been loyal to, they'd been pretty loyal. But when I asked a show of hands, it was breaking even Steven, which alerted me we got a problem.
Wow.
We should have been winning, 60-40 at worst, maybe 65-35 if they had stuck to the norm in this particular union. And I said, well, I didn't take a position. I was, doing a focus group. You can't do that. I don't want to do that. I make the Democratic arguments and the Republican arguments, see where things come out. And so I asked people why they were, why the Trump people, why they were voting for Trump, including those who had, and it kind of answered, you got first of all, well, he's standing up for America. They often mention trade policy, regardless of whether Trump's policies have been successful or not. One of the Democrats, one of the Trump guys was saying, hey, at least, he mentioned trade, and the Democrats said, well, he hasn't done anything. He hasn't achieved anything. And a very disturbing answer as a Trump guy gave coming back was, well, at least he tried. And boy, that went through me I didn't say anything or didn't express it, but I said, holy Jesus, if people are, if these are for Democratic working people are giving that kind of an answer,
yeah,
we got a problem.
Yeah.
We got a big problem. Well, then another guy, and this is where we get to the elitism, and another guy got on, another guy who was a Trump voter in this union. And they all love the union. They die for the union. It's a good union. They make good wages, blah, blah, blah. So they asked him, why are you voting for Trump? And I asked him, what's some of the reasons that? And he said, I'd always been a Democrat. Things were not that great and I voted for Obama in 2008. I voted for him in 2012. But, we didn't get a lot of work in the second Obama administration. And this guy comes along and says, we're going to fight for workers on trade and stuff like that. This guy, Trump. And I never voted Republican before, but, what the hell? From this guy's perspective, maybe he would do better than Obama and the Democrats. And so he says, I voted for Trump in 2016. He says, you know what? And now they're calling people who voted for him a bunch of racists. Well, I voted for Obama in 2008. And I voted for him in 2012. And now they're calling me a racist. Well, you know what? And this is what he said to this focus group. He said, well, screw them. I'm going to vote for Trump again. I'm not a racist. If they call me a racist, forget about it. There's no way I'm going to vote for them. And so it was a prime example of our alienating people who should be on our side.
Yeah.
I think the media had a lot to do with this, but also the separation that we now have. The upper middle classes are Democrats. They don't hang around with, a lot of working class Democrats. There's a social cleavage. Not a cleavage. It's just you don't hang. Everybody's in their own little group now, and I think And I think that was reflected in the polls, that most people accepted the notion that this was going to be a huge Democratic wave. And the people who most accepted were the media in the big cities. Oh, yeah, of course, it's going to be a big wave. People in the countryside, I think, were very skeptical of that analysis even before Election Day.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Jim,
Well,
I mean, still proud to be a Democrat because we're still on the right side of the issues year in and year out. And I think if we do it right and present ourselves correctly, I think we can win these folks back again. Because I don't think, particularly if Trump is no longer the president, that the kinds of people leading the Republican Party, the normal Republican leadership, they are not particularly friendly to American working people.
Yeah.
And I think we can deal with that and demonstrate that.
Before we let you go, what challenges does Biden and his opposition face? I mean, here we are again. We're Friday evening. It looks like he's going to get Pennsylvania. It looks like he will be the president-elect. We're not sure about the Senate, although it looks like the Republicans will hold it. We lost a little bit of ground in the House. What are the challenges moving forward?
Well, I think one of the challenges, obviously, is who wins the Senate. I mean, the Senate changes the ballgame a lot. If the Republicans gain the Senate, obviously, then Biden has to negotiate with them, and it does impede his ability to, enact the kind of progressive stuff that could help ease getting some of these folks back. On the other hand, if there's a fight over this stuff, if the Republicans go back into opposing things that help working people, the fight itself could help the Democrats in 2022. And that's the problem the Republicans are going to have. What kind of party are we? They didn't say anything, and when Trump ran up some of the biggest deficits that made the New Deal look like a little Tea Party. I mean,
Yeah.
Trump ran up the biggest deficits in America. This more than World War II.
Yeah.
And did you hear a peep from the Republicans about deficits? No, they didn't. They didn't have they have to confront who are we? It was great having, Trump. He won us the presidency, and, under the table, we're getting all these deals, in terms of policy that are happening. But basically, in terms of basic fiscal activities, Trump really outspent Roosevelt. And I think the Republicans are going to be, and so I think they're going to be faced with the question of their identity and who are they and what are we for? If they go back to a balanced budget kind of thing, I think they're in deep trouble, because I think the American people now expect not just a little activist government, they expect a lot, and they expect that working people should be treated very well because they're the heroes of the last 2 years. So we'll see what happens. So the Republicans are going to face the question of identity and who we are and what are we for. And the Democrats to some degree also. I mean they'll have, the left part of the party. And I hate to say it, because I've always regarded myself as part of the left part of the party. But, some of these other issues, I think they're more. I think Biden will be about as good as anyone we could have gotten to press the right issues and use the right language. I mean, he is a real good Roosevelt, Truman, Kennedy Democrat. And if we want to have someone to bring back those voters, having someone from Biden's background and orientation, and he's always been solidly in support of labor issues and working people issues. I just hope he wins, and I think following his instincts, his natural instincts, I think we'll do okay. So I'm pretty optimistic about Biden.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that Joe Biden, the former senator, still has a lot of friends in the Senate on both sides of the aisle.
Mm-hmm.
And that I would think, because remember, Mitch McConnell, the night of the inauguration or whatever it was, when President Obama was first elected, and he said, one-term president, we're not going to do anything he wants. It doesn't matter what he brings to us. We're going to deny it.
Uh-huh.
I suspect that it wouldn't be that way with a Joe Biden presidency, at least not to that degree.
I think it's absolutely true, Jim. And Republican leaders are already saying that we can work with Joe. That's what they're saying, and that would be good. I mean, it makes the political task a little harder, but so what? It makes the country better. So, to some degree, as Democrats, we should welcome Republican support. I mean, if Republicans are willing to get behind things that help working people, so be it. And thank God. I mean, I have no problem with that.
It's going to be, it's going to be an interesting couple of Tuesdays still to go this week. It's certainly going to be, it's certainly going to be an interesting few years. Vic, of course, we always enjoy having you with us. We'd love to have you back again soon. Vic Fingerhut, veteran polling and media advisor. Also, of course, Associate Professor Emeritus of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Mary Washington. As always, Vic, thank you for your time. Can't wait to do it with you again soon.
Well, you're very welcome, Jim, and you always raise the right issues. So it's always interesting talking with you about all these things.
Well, thanks very much, Vic, and we'll be doing it again soon, I'm sure.
Great.
And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And we thank Vic Fingerhut for making today's show possible and for his many contributions to this podcast. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. For the America's Democrats podcast, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.